Today's daf is daf Yud Aleph, and we're about 7 lines down from the top. Tanya, we have a brayso that records an explanation of the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Let's just review. There's a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua as to a number of different points. Foremost is, when was the world created? In what month? Rabbi Eliezer says the world was created in Tishrei. Rabbi Yeshua has it in Nisan. There's another machlokes, which is a spin-off, in terms of when Avram and Yaakov were born. According to Rabbi Eliezer in Tishrei, according to Rabbi Yeshua in Nisan. And then as a result of that machlokes, when did the Avos die? According to Rabbi Eliezer, they died in Tishrei. According to Rabbi Yeshua, they died in Nisan. Everyone agrees, both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, that on Rosh Hashana of Tishrei, God remembered Sarah, Rosh, Hashana, the three Akaros, and decreed that they would get pregnant. As far as the day in which Yosef HaTzadik got out from jail, when Paro took him and put a crown on his head, it seems that both Rabbi Eliezer and even Rabbi Yeshua agreed that took place on Rosh Hashana. And as far as when the Klal Yisrael of Mitzrayim terminated their work, their slavery, and they became free, Rabbi Eliezer has that on Rosh Hashana, meaning Aleph Tishrei. So that's when Batla Avodas Parach. And Rabbi Yeshua agrees that it took place in Tishrei, and 6 months later, the Geula took place in Nisan. That's not an issue. As far as the future Geula is concerned, at the ultimate redemption, the end of days, we have a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer, who puts it in Tishrei, whereas Rabbi Yeshua has it in Nisan. So Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Minayin Shebetishrei Nivra Olam. How do I analyze the psukim and come to the conclusion that the world was created in the month of Tishrei? Shenemar, with regard to the creation, it says, Vayomer Elokim Tadshe Haaretz Desha Eitzev Mazria Zera Eitz Pri. So we're going to emphasize the following words, Tadshe, and the phrase Eitz Pri. Tadshe indicates that the Aretz, the ground, the land, is already covered by vegetation, by its growth. And that happens towards the end of the growth period. Now, the growth period is between Nisan and Tishrei. So Tishrei is kind of like at the end of the summer, almost like the last day in Av. And by that point already, anything that was planted during the winter months or spring has already reached fruition. It's already fully grown. And that's called Tadshe. In the English translation, he adds a point over here. Just read it to you. It's here in footnote number 9. He writes, Tishrei falls out at the end of the summer. The fruit of the trees has ripened, and the land is covered with vegetation. So that's Tadshe Aretz Desh. And the phrase Eitz Pri means that the trees are full with fruits. The Ilan Mole Peros, and the Omer Tishrei. Tishrei, at the end of the summer, is when the vegetation has developed, and you'll find the desha, you'll find the tree, the fruits on the trees. He brings another proof for this, Also, Perek, this particular season of the year in which the world was created is Man Revia Hoisa. Right? The Torah describes the rains that came down from the heavens right after the earth was created. And now that Revia, which is otherwise known as Yeridas Kishamim, is during the month of Tishrei, or a little bit after Tishrei. But Tishrei is when the earliest rains fall. Yardu Gishon Vitzimchu, as a result of the rains that fell immediately after creation, the vegetation grew. Shenemar v'eid yalam min haaretz v'hichkas kol pnei ha'adam. So again, Tishrei coincides with Yeridas, the time of Yeridas Kishamim, which is very beneficial for the trees, of course, and all the vegetation. And that places creation in the month of Tishrei. Rabbi Shua Omer Minayin sheben Nisan nivra olam shenemar vatotze. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer learns from the word Tadshe, which is in Pasuk Yud Aleph at the beginning of Bereshis, the following Pasuk says Vatotze. Vatotze ha'aretz deshe. Esev Azriya Zora. The eighth Osip. Now the Pasuk substitutes Vatotze for Tadshe. And Vatotze means that it's just beginning, the process of Vatotze. The Oretz is just beginning to produce its vegetation. And Eitz Osepri is describing the tree from a perspective of its potential, that it's Megadol Peros, it's Ose Peros. V'ezu Chodesh ha'aretz B'leya D'shoim v'Ilan Motzi Peros. When does the beginning of the process of vegetation, what month does it coincide with? Rabbi Omer Nisan. Then Nisan. So the description of the Torah, the creation of the world, indicates that we're in the season of Nisan. And furthermore, also Perek, Zman Behema B'chai Roshem is Davgim Ze Eitzel Ze. The period of time in the calendar year when the animals are involved in period Varivya, when they're Mizdavgim Ze Eitzel Ze, they're mating, that's immediately after the Bria Ha'olam, and that takes place in the month of Nisan. And this is a pasuk that we had earlier on Daf Ches from Sefer Tehillim, Shenemar Lovshu Karim Atzon V'Amokim Yatfu Var Yisro'u Af Yoshiru. So back on Daf Ches, we said that Lovshu Karim Atzon means that the tzon becomes pregnant. And when is that? That coincides with the time period that's Yisro'u Af Yoshiru, which is the time that we begin to cut the tvua down from the fields, because now the tvua, the crops, the grains are making these noises. When they bang against each other, it sounds like yashiru, it sounds like they're singing. So the wind blows the kernels, the shibolim, and nokshosu alzu, they bang into each other. V'nishma kol, you hear a voice as if they're singing. And that period of time is Chodesh Nisan, and that coincides with Lovshu Karim Atzon, when the animals begin to get pregnant. And that's what's going to happen right after God creates the world. We'll soon see that the creation was already mature. the animals were mature, so they could already begin the process of Mizdavgin right after Bria. Now, the time period and the season in which the animals are Mizdavgin, we see from this pasuk in Tehillim, is Chodesh Nisan. Because that's when we have Yisra'u Af Yashir. The Gemara now turns back to Rabbi Eliezer. V'idach nami oksiv eitz ose pri. Now, eitz ose pri seems to be indicating that we're talking about the early process, and we're even describing, shall we say, the potential of the trees to produce fruit, but not as you would interpret it, that the tree's already full with fruits. It's much earlier period of time, which we should identify with Tishrei. So how does Rabbi Eliezer explain the pasuk eitz ose pri? Now, keep in mind that Rabbi Eliezer put all his emphasis on eitz pri in the previous pasuk, and eitz pri means that the eitz is full with peros, but here it says eitz ose pri in the very next pasuk. So how is he going to interpret eitz ose pri? Ose means it's not on the tree, it's not there, it hasn't grown yet, but it has the potential to grow. So Rabbi Eliezer says we should take this pasuk sort of out of its context in describing exactly what went on in creation, but rather this pasuk is a bracha that God bestows on the world. And we're going to see this time after time that God bestows brachas on the world. In this case, Hahu, the eitz ose pri, is a bracha l'doros for all generations with the chsiv. And the bracha is that the eitz in the trees should be able to produce their fruits for all generations. But now, if you're talking about creation itself, at that moment, it was eitz pri. It was already full with fruits. V'idach nami, and what about Rabbi Yeshua, who argues that the world was created in Nisan Aksiv eitz pri? And eitz pri sounds like the eitz is already full with peros, and that could not possibly be identified with Nisan. That has to be at the end of the summer. That's when the trees are full with ripe fruits, which would coincide with Tishrei. So the Gemara answers, Hahu ki de Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Meaning that this pasuk of eitz pri, that sounds at first glance to mean that the eitzim are full with peros, that's to be understood in the light of a general statement about creation, which was presented by Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Kol ma'aseh gracious b'komasa. Komasa means b'melo gadol. It was fully mature. Nivro. That's how they were created. And we're going to derive this from the pasuk eitz pri, which sounds like the eitz is already full with its peros. So the trees, and we'll soon see everything, according to Mishnah, was created mature, able to bear fruit, and that's the maturity of the tree. So then, according to this reinterpretation of Rabbi Yeshua, and he's, in a sense, reflecting Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's drasha, the interpretation is that the trees were not yet laden with fruit, but they were born maturely with already the potential to bear fruit. Normally, when you plant a tree, it's going to take years until it produces fruit. But the trees that were created in Bereshis, although they weren't laden with fruit, according to Rabbi Yeshua, but nevertheless, they were created with the potential to immediately bear fruit. Ulitzivyono nivro. And this is based on a medrash that Chazal say that God turned to the various parts of creation, asked them if they would be interested, if there's a ratzon. Others say Litzivyona means the shape that they were created in. Shenemar vaychul hashamayim v'aretz v'chol tzva'am Al tikri tzva'am el tzivyona, which, as we said before, means ritzona. And we learn from this that their creation was l'daitam. They were, in a sense, partners and certainly in agreement with creation. And that surah, the way they looked and the way they tasted and so forth, is all based on what they wanted. They wanted to give that presentation, that surah, that shape, that Rabbi Eliezer Omer minayin shebetishrei noldu avos. Shenemar, how do we know the avos were born? This is Avraham and Yaakov during the month of Tishrei. And now we go to the famous chapter. This is the 8th chapter, Malachim Aleph, in which Shlomo Melech, on the day of the inauguration, the Chanukas Beis Hamikdash, described by Tanaf Ha'ikolu El HaMelech Shlomo Kol Ish Yisrael B'Yerach Ha'esonim Bechag, and then the end of the pasuk, Bechag Hu Chodesh Hashvi. And we keep in mind that Chodesh Hashvi is the month of Tishrei. And that month is described as Yerach HaEsonim. And we'll see that the word Esonim is an allusion to the Avos. And we're talking about the month of Tishrei, which is called Chodesh HaShvit. So that's the month of the Avos. Yerach Shenoldu Bo Esonei Olam. Esonei Olam are the foundations of the world, or the strong might of the world. And the world is omed in the schus of these Esonim. And who are these Esonim? None other than the Avos. What's the connection here between the word Eson and might? Where do we see that the word Eson indicates Chozek? Kirichsiv, quoting a pasuk by Bilam, it says, Eson Oshavecha, which means your Moshav is very strong. And this is an appropriate word to describe the Avos because they are very strong. They are the foundations of the world. The Omer, and furthermore, we darshan a pasuk in Sefer Micha, Shim'u harim es riv Hashem, v'heisonim mostei oretz. Let the mountains hear the contention between Hashem and Klal Yisrael. And the pasuk repeats itself. It says, Shimu Harim Esriv Hashem, Vaisanim, which also refers to the mountains, Mostei Eretz. The Omer. So from this pasuk, Rabbi Eliezer derives that the Harim are called Esanim because the last part of the pasuk is a mirror image of the first part of the pasuk. So the first part of the pasuk mentions the Harim, the second mentions Esanim. Esanim are the Harim. The Omer, furthermore in Shir Shirim, Kol Dodi Nizabah Daleg Al Harim Mikapetz Al Hagvaos. So what do we derive from Daleg Al Harim? What do we derive from Mikapetz Al Hagvaos? So we dash in the following: Daleg Al Harim means that God quickly brought the gates of Golus Mitzrayim, and he brought about an early termination of Golus Mitzrayim, and there was a Geula of Yisrael in Mitzrayim, and that was Bediluk, because they were meant to be in Mitzrayim for 400 years, maybe 430 years, whatever the calculation is, and instead they went out after 210 years. And all that happened b'schus ha'avos. So the avos here are being compared to the harim. Mekapetz al Gvaos, Viskusei Mos. So God prematurely, so to speak, terminated the Golus Mitzrayim, brought about the Gula Mitzrayim in the merit of the Mos. But we see clearly that the Avos are called Harim, and Harim we saw were called Esanim. That was in the Pasuk in Micha. So the Avos, therefore, are called Esanim. And the month of Tishrei is called the Yerach HaEsanim because this is the month in which the Avos were born. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Minayin shebenisan noldu Avos, shenemar, vayhi b'shmonim shana, v'arba me'os shana. So we're talking about 480 years, let's say, Bnei Yisrael, Be'eretz Mitzrayim, Hashana Revi'is, meaning the 4th year of the reign of Shlomo. The Chodesh Ziv, Hu HaChodesh HaSheni, so we're talking about the month of Iyar. Limloch Shlomo Al Yisrael, Vayiven Abayis Lashem. So the month of Iyar is called Chodesh Ziv. Now, why is it called Ziv? Ziv means like radiation, the radiance. The Yerach Shenoldu Bo Zivtane Olam. It's the month when we enter into this month and already the Avos were born. These are those who radiate a beautiful radiance in the world. And that's the month of Iyar, meaning the Avos were already born before Iyar, and that's during Nisan. How do we know we're talking about Iyar? Because it says Hu HaChodesh HaSheni, and the second month is Iyar. Anyway, we derive from this that the Avos were born in Nisan, which is the month before Chodesh HaZiv. V'idach Nami. Now the Gemara asks, according to Rabbi Yeshua, that the Avos were born in Nisan HaKsiv. It says regarding the month of Tishrei, B'yerach HaEsau. So we saw that Rabbi Eliezer quoted that pasuk of Yerach HaEsanim in Malachim Aleph, Perek Ches, to prove that the Avos were in fact born in Tishrei. So what's Rabbi Yeshua going to respond? And the Gemara answers, Hasam, when the pasuk is describing the month of Tishrei as Yerach HaEsanim, of the mighty one, it was not referring to the Avos, but rather the Takif of mitzvahs. The month is very strong with mitzvahs. You know, you have months like Cheshvan, where there are hardly any mitzvahs. And then you have a month like Tishrei that's overwhelmed, overburdened with mitzvahs. It's got shofar, it's got the mitzvah of Yom Kippur, you have Yichiv Pesukah, Netil Lulav, Mitzvah Hamayim, Netil Sarava. All this happens on Chag HaSukkot. So that's the month of Tishrei. So Tishrei is called Yerach HaEsanim because it's mighty with mitzvahs. Idach Nami, but what's Rabbi Eliezer going to do with Rabbi Yeshua's pasuk? Ksiv, it says regarding Chodesh Iyar, Bechodesh Ziv, and we identified Ziv as referring to the Avos and the Mahos, and we proved from that already by Iyar the Avos had been born, meaning they were born in Nisan. So Rabbi Eliezer responds, who that which the month of the year is called Chodesh Ziv is the Ispe Ziva Le'ilone. So this has to do with botany. During the month of Iyar, there's a certain radiance to the trees. That's called Ziva. That's why Nisan, when we go out and we make the bracha on the new fruits that grow on the tree or the budding of the fruits, this is all during the month of Iyar, which is called Chodesh Ziv because of the radiance of the tree when the tree is blooming. That's called Melavlavin, V'omdim b'prichasam, and they have new growth. And all of that new growth of the trees happens in the month of Nisan. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Haiman did Nafik Yomi Nisan. When you go out into the fields, etc. During the month of Nisan, you'll see the blooming of the trees. And also Pri Chasam, we said that there's a perach, there's a kind of a bud. His Omer, he recites the bracha, Baruch Shaloch Chisar Me'olamo Klum, Ubarabo Brios Tovos Vilonos Tovos, Lisnos Bohen B'nei Adam. And I have a nostalgic memory flash because my father, may rest in peace, spoke about the nusach of this bracha under my chuppah when I got married. He compared my wife and I to Ilonos Tovos and so forth and so on. Man diom b'nisan noldu b'nisan mesim. Man diom b'tishrei noldu b'tishrei mesim. According to Rabbi Yeshua, the others were born in Nisan, they died in Nisan. This is because a tzaddik dies on the day that he was born. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, they were born in Tishrei and they died in Tishrei. So Nemar, where do we see that a tzaddik dies on the day of his birth? With regard to Moshe Rabbeinu, we read it not long ago, Shenemar, it says in Dvarim Alamed Aleph, Vayomer Aleim ben 120 shana anochi hayom. On this day, which is my last day on earth, I am exactly 120 years old. She'ein tamid lomar hayom. Why do you have to add the word hayom? It's completely redundant. He could have said ben esrim shana anochi, and that would mean today I'm 120. My tamid lomar hayom. Malu Yomai Ushnosai. On this day, I complete the days and the years, meaning the day that I was born. The tzaddikim will die on the same day that they were born. Moshe Rabbeinu was born on the 7th of Adar, and he died on the 7th Adar. You know, Haman made a mistake. He saw that Moshe Rabbeinu had died in Chodesh Adar. And he thought that would mean it's a good month to annihilate the Jews, but little did he realize that Moshe was also born in the month of Adar. Now, this concept of Yushnoseim, Maleim, means that what God is in a sense testifying is that the tzaddikim exploited to its maximum every day of their lives. So every year you get a certain misima, we call it, right? A certain responsibility and a project, what you can accomplish in that year. And they died on the same day that they were born, meaning completing their year to indicate that they had done exactly what they had to do. They filled in the entire year. Once we determined the month in which the others were born, then ipso facto we know that's the month they died. The Pesach nolad Yitzchak. So the birth of Yitzchak was on Pesach. You know, and how do we know this? In Siv, we just read it in the Torah. No, wait a minute. We read Lech Lecha, right? What do we read Lech Shabbos? Oh, so this is Parshat. I'm going to read this this Shabbos. Lamoed Ashuve Lecha Beis Chayol L'Sarav. What does it mean, Lamoed? Lamoed means on the first Yom Tov. Now, again, it's a little bit tricky here because when you say the first Yom Tov, it can't be immediately afterwards. I mean, there's got to be a pregnancy period. But it means that from the day of the Besorah, meaning when the Malachi Hashem told Avram and Sarah that they would have a child until she actually gave birth, we want to establish that as close as possible. And since Avram was notified on Pesach, second, in Nemer Avram B'Yom Tov She'agir Rishon Telei Tzara Emosai Koi. So now the Gemara is analyzing. When did the three Malachim come to visit Avram? Elam is going to say it was on Pesach. Then it can't make sense that La Moed, meaning in the next Moed, because that would be Atzeres. Now, from Pesach Tatzeres, we're talking about 50 days. And we need a pregnancy and then a birth. There's no such thing as a birth of 50 days. Ella, but rather, Avram was the Koi Batzeres. He was given the Besorah on Chag Atzeres. Amar Lei, and Hashem revealed that Sarah would give birth on the next Yontif, which is Tishrei. Now, Tishrei is 5 months after Sivan. Akati b'chamisha yarchi mika yolda. Something's still missing over here. It's not possible that Sarah could have given birth on the very next Moed, which would be Chag HaSukkos. Now, from Atzeres to Sukkos is 5 months. Ela dekoi b'chat. It must be that the Malachim came to notify Avram on Sukkos, because Amar Lei bin Nisan. And now the Malachim are saying that on the very next Moed, which is 6 months later, Pesach, Sarah would give birth. So the Gemara is not happy with that. 6 months is not enough of a period of time for a woman to give birth. So Gemara says, Tana, we learned in the Brisa, Osa Shana, that year of the birth of Yitzchak, Uberes. So there were 7 months between Sukkot and Pesach, which would mean that Yitzchak was born after 7 months of pregnancy. That's something we can live with. So the Gemara asks, but wait a minute, sof ki midale mar yomi tuma batzri. We know, and Chazal proved it from the Psukim here at the beginning of Parashat Vayera, that Sarah Pirsa Nida, that the very moment they gave her the Sarah, she was in the Oel, she already became a Nida. The Gemara about Metzia da Pesayim derives this from Vayikach Chema v'chalav ben bakar sharasav yitin lifneim, and there's no mention of the Ugos that she, in the previous pasuk, Avram had commanded her, Lushi vasi Ugos. And the reason why the Ugos were not brought out is because Pirsa Nida, and the leash of the Ugos was the Tumah. So we have to already subtract from these 7 months the time of Nida, because Avram could not have consummated the intimacy immediately when he got to the Sorah, because she was a Nida, and Avram was Mekayim the whole Torah before it was given. So we're already whittling down the 7 months. She could only have gotten pregnant, let's say, earliest a week later. So that cuts out a week from the 7 months. Even according to that Mandiomar, who says that a woman gives birth after full months, that's only with regard to a 9-month pregnancy. Then she'll give birth after 9 months. But in the case of a premature birth, and a woman gave birth after 7 months, then she'll give birth after the 6th month into the 7th month. So you need 6 complete months, and then a mekutayim. Mekutayim means part of a month. And that's part of the 7th month. The Nemar, at the beginning of Sefer Shmuel, regarding the birth of Shmuel, it says, Vayehi liskufos hayomim vatar chana vatelid ben. So Shmuel was born after Tkufos and after Yomim. Now the minimum of Tkufos is 2. The minimum of Yomim is 2. And we're going to grab the lowest possible number. That's called Tafasimur below Tafasta. So Mia Tkufos Shtayim, and a Tkufa is 30 days. I'm sorry, Tkufa is 3 months. So 2 Tkufos is 6 months. Be Yomim is Shtayim. So it's 2 days into the 7th month. So it's 6 months plus a Makutos. So he was born after 6 months and 2 days. So a woman can give birth to Shiva even if it's not a full 7th month, and therefore Sarah gave birth in less than 7 months' time. Now the Brisa says, Rosh Hashana Nifkida Sarah Rachel v'Chana Minol. How do we know this? Amar Abelazar. How do we know that Sarah was remembered, so to speak, on high on Rosh Hashana? Isa Pkida Pkida. The Isa is Zechira Zechira. So we're going to have like A equals B and B equals C, therefore A equals C, a kind of transitive law. So what's Pkida Lepkida? There's a Gzera Shava between Sarah and Chana. In both cases, the Torah uses the word Pkida. And that Pkida is on Rosh Hashana. But we can only know this with another Gzera Shava, which is Schira L'Schira, also from Rosh Hashana, because Ksiv Barachel, when Rachel was remembered on high, it says, Vayizkar Elokim es Rachel. So you see the Torah used the word Zechira. Ksiv Bechana, and Chana was remembered, Vayeda Elkanah Chan es Chana Ishto Vayizkerah Hashem. Again, using the same words of Zochar, of Zechira. So we have Vayizkar Elokim es Rachel, and in Chana we have Vayizkerah Hashem. So that's Chana and Rachel, correct? We'll get back to Sarah in a minute, because Sarah is Gzera Shava to Chana. But first we have to establish that Chana was Nifkida Rosh Hashana, and that's based on the Gzera Shava that connects Rachel with Chana. In both cases, the words. Now, how do we know that this Nifkida and Zechira took place on Rosh Hashana in both Rachel and Chana? Because the word Zechira connects us back to Rosh Hashana. It says in the pasuk in Emor, so the word Zichron is used with regard to Gzera Shava, with regard to Rosh Hashanah. That's going to give us a Gzera Shava to the Zechira of Rachel and Chana, meaning that they were remembered on Rosh Hashanah. Now we go back to Pekida Lepekida, Tichsiv B'Chana, Pokat Hashem es Chana, Uksiv in Sarah, it says Hashem Pokat es Sarah. So just like we derived that the conclusion that Chana was remembered on Rosh Hashanah, that we know from Zikaron, now we're going to, through the Gzera Shava Pekida B'Kida, we're going to equate Sarah with Chana, and we're going to derive the conclusion that Sarah was likewise Nifkida Rosh Hashanah. So all three of our great mothers, Sarah, Rachel, and Chana, were all remembered on Rosh Hashanah. Just 1 second. So do we have it all? Let's see, we have Chana, Sarah, Chana, and Rachel. Correct. Rosh Hashanah, Yotze Yosef Beis Asur Minol. And how do we know that Yosef was freed from jail by Paro on Rosh Hashanah? The Ksiv, a pasuk in Tilim, which we recite in the Shir Shal Yom of what? Monday, I think. Anyway, see the floating around? Oh, that's. Do you mind about looking this up for me? The Shir Shal Yom of Monday. Yeah. It's not Monday, then it's Thursday. Confused. All right. So what does the pasuk say? Tik'u b'chodesh shofar, which is going to be a reference to Rosh Hashanah. Ba'kesel yom chagenu, and that chag is a chag that's called b'kesel. Oh, it's Thursday. Okay, sorry. I said Monday. It was one of those. And then the pasuk says, "Kichok Yisrael hu," etc. So we blow the shofar on a holiday that has kisui, that's covered up, and it's a chok b'Yisrael to blow the shofar on that day. Now we had a Gemara back on the Ches that this day is Rosh Hashana because that's when the Levana, the moon, is covered over. Because that's the only holiday that we have that is on the first of the month.